Of course, I'm the last one into the room. Thanks for being here and with your close attention. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Edward M. Kennedy Institute for the United States Senate. My name is Adam Hines, and I'm the CEO here, and it is my absolute privilege to welcome you here in this exact replica of the United States Senate. For those of you who are here, and for those of you who are online from around the country and around the world, thank you for tuning in as well. And I have to say, this location is incredibly fitting for a conversation like we're having today. Senator Kennedy had an unwavering commitment to bridging divides and to dedicating, and a dedication to investing in and preparing the next generation of leaders. His connection and commitment, and that of the rest of the Kennedy family, to the island of Ireland was also unwavering. And so it is appropriate that we have, that another generation of Kennedys has been working on the future of Ireland and Northern Ireland. And so I want to extend a very special thank you to Kennedy Institute board member and, until recently, United States Special Envoy to Northern Ireland for Economic Affairs, Representative Joseph Kennedy III. We're incredibly grateful to have you here tonight, Joe. He'll be interviewed, as you can see, by Professor Mary Murphy, who joined Boston College this fall, the fall of 2024. And she'll be introduced shortly by the Irish Consul General. They will be followed by a fascinating panel on how the next generation navigates history and divides. And now I have the distinct honor of extending a special thank you to the Consulate General of Ireland in Boston for working with our team here to organize and to sponsor this event. Consul General FitzGerald, we appreciate your support here at the Institute and your strong presence in the community here in Boston and beyond. So it's my honor to invite you to the stage to offer your own welcoming words as well. Thanks.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much, Adam. It's really great to be back here in the Kennedy Institute, and I just want to say how proud we are in the Irish Consulate here in Boston to collaborate once again with this wonderful institute. On behalf of my team, and I do want to single out Paul Rooney, our Deputy Consul General, who's really been the driving force for this event at the Consulate. But I want to thank my team and also your team, Adam. It's been incredible working with you to bring this event together this evening. And indeed, as Adam said, the core mission of this wonderful institute is to educate students and visitors about the essential role each of us plays in our democracy and in our society. And I think our values, our belief in the principles of democracy, including the importance of fair representation, social justice, and the right to participate in the political process, while also ensuring that marginalised groups have a voice and are fairly treated. These are all at the heart of our discussions here this evening as we reflect on the lessons of the Irish peace process. And indeed, the Good Friday Agreement was reached 27 years ago through the determination to achieve peace by a generation of political leaders in Northern Ireland and through a strong partnership between successive Irish and British governments. And I'm pleased to say that Irish-British partnership is continuing today. The Good Friday Agreement provides an indispensable framework for political relationships on the island of Ireland and across the islands. It affirms a mission for us in politics, in civil society, in our communities, to strive in every practical way towards reconciliation for the different traditions on the island of Ireland. And so I think it's really important that we also hear from the next generation, the leaders of the future, the younger generation who will build on the achievements of those who have gone before them. So this evening, as Adam has said, we have a programme in two parts. The first is a fireside chat, and the second, a panel discussion. And first, we're going to hear from former Congressman and Special Envoy Joe Kennedy, who himself has played such an important role in advancing peace and prosperity on the island of Ireland. And during his tenure as US Special Envoy to Northern Ireland, he convinced several high-profile US investors to travel to Northern Ireland to see that region with fresh eyes, and he personally highlighted the terrific innovation and opportunities that exist for investors in Northern Ireland, and thank you for that. His commitment to public service here in the US and for the people of Northern Ireland has been truly exemplary. And as president of Citizens Energy, a diversified renewable energy non-profit, he continues that public service. I also particularly want to welcome today to the Institute Professor Mary Murphy, who, as Adam said, took her position in Boston last year as head of the prestigious Irish Institute at Boston College. And before moving to Boston, Professor Murphy was head of the Department of Government and Politics at University College Cork. She has completed very extensive research on peace and conflict in Northern Ireland and on the politics of Brexit on the island of Ireland. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our first speakers for the first part of the programme. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed to Consul General Síghle FitzGerald and to Adam Hines and all the team here at the Edward M. Kennedy Institute. It's a real pleasure to be here, and these are just wonderful surroundings. I doubt I'll ever get to speak in anywhere quite so beautiful, but it's a real pleasure to welcome Congressman Joe Kennedy to the Institute. And we're going to have a chat about the work that you've done as Special Envoy, but we're going to try and focus it specifically around an emphasis on young people. So I wanted to start off by asking you a question about your younger days. And in particular, I'm interested to know about your journey to becoming the Special Envoy in recent years. What preceded that in terms of your consciousness of Northern Ireland and the politics of that place and the troubles, and how it impacted on you as a young person?
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. It is great to see a whole lot of friends in the audience here. Thank you for being here. Professor, it's a privilege for me to be doing this with you. Thank you for making the time here. Cork's loss was Boston College's gain, without question. And, let me just say before we get too far down this, from my perspective here, in this time of fill in the blank, I'll say uncertainty, you all can pick a different word. Those relationships across institutions and across communities are ever more important. So for Boston College to be able to leverage your experience and relationships and expertise and to keep these relationships strong across the Atlantic are all the more important, so thank you. Look, I think in terms of what preceded the opportunity for me to be in that position, I mean, there's a lot of things that went into it. Background in the House, I tried to speak in the other version of this, it didn't work, right? So that helped. I also obviously think that, you had a president of the United States that has at that time, a very strong affinity for the island of Ireland, and understood and understands at a visceral level the power of connection, of connectivity, of family, of culture, of storytelling, all of these things. And, for my father's side of my family, the importance of our Irish heritage was something that was passed down intentionally and deeply, I think, to all of us. And I think critically in that, not just the story of, hey, your parents, your grandparents, your relatives came from some other place. Most people living in the United States now all share that story. It was where we came from and why, and a really deliberate intent to make sure that we didn't lose that connection, such that when I was over in Ireland last summer, I took our kids back down to our old family farm in Wexford that is being farm by a distant cousin, but still in our family. Our kids at the time, I'm not sure how much of it they will remember. They were more taken with the 2 border collies that were herding the sheep, Messi and Flo. They will remember those names. If you ask them anything else about that trip, they don't remember much, but they remember the names of the dogs. But the intent was to make sure that they could walk around those buildings that are still standing and walk through an old stone cottage and start to try to leave that imprint. Such that when we come today and we are talking about peace building in these conversations, while this nation struggles mightily with questions on immigration, headlines today about refugee status being granted to Afrikaners that are landing in the United States today, while it being denied to millions of others, and having that status revoked from millions of others here in the United States already. I think there's a unique, the Irish, I think, are famous for many things, but for me anyway, it is a unique appreciation for empathy. And I think the world needs more of it at this moment, so.
Okay. So in terms of, you talk about the United States today and this period of instability that the United States is experiencing. How do you navigate, the frustrations, I suppose, and contribute to combating the type of polarization that we're seeing in the United States? What would be your advice for young people here today in terms of what you learned from the Northern Ireland experience?
So, look, I think Northern Ireland itself, obviously, it's a fascinating place. Northern Ireland, I was very taken with it in my time there. I went over and back, an awful lot. But I think a couple things stand out to me. One, from a very American lens on this, we look at, as we often do, we look at places in the world that were in conflict as a label of post-conflict. It's a post-conflict society, whatever that actually means. And we think of that as the Troubles that was roughly from the late 1960s through 1998, which kind of ignores the 300 years plus of issues that were before, and gives short shift to the extraordinary amount of hard work, of emotional work that has been done in the 27 years after. For the young people here or watching or participating, whether it's here or wherever you happen to be, I'd say 2 big observations, right? First, oftentimes there's an American kind of predisposition to say, what can we do to teach, to give, to try to create more peace and harmony and stability? Professor, I gotta say, the leadership that I saw coming out of a First Minister and Deputy First Minister in Northern Ireland today, they have an awful lot to teach America's politics about how to get along in if you care about democracy, which means you care about a place that is safe for debate and discussion and discourse and disagreement, how they're doing it. If you want to make sure that there's a place where you have a right and an ability to have your identity protected because it's you. The United States is in the midst of tearing ourselves apart over these debates about identity politics, but when I think about it, particularly from what I saw there, trying to silence identity politics, if you went to Northern Ireland today and told a unionist you can't be a unionist, told a Catholic you can't be a Catholic, they'd look at you like you're crazy. You can't do that. But what you can do is say, you can be you, but then I should be able to be me. And there's differences and divides over that, but if you want your kid to have a good school and a safe community and a bright future, I want that for my child too. And Northern Ireland has done a much better job of trying to wrestle with those questions of how do you preserve identity and build community. And we are tearing each other apart about it at the moment. And for those young people, you're going to be far better at that than almost anybody. You don't carry the trauma or the baggage that other generations have, but it's your future folks are fighting over, and you get to claim it, and you get to decide what happens with it. And what a decision, what an opportunity, what an honor, what a challenge that is, but man, it's yours for the taking by definition, so shape it.
That's such an interesting message that you're looking to Northern Ireland as an example of how to manage relationships in this period here in the United States.
We're not doing such a great job, in case you haven't noticed.
But it's a very positive message, and it's something that I think Northern Ireland can be very proud of.
Northern Ireland should be very proud. The Irish, we were joking with Sheila on the backstage, the Irish have a unique ability to see the downside of most things, right? They're very good at it. But that means they oftentimes overlook the extraordinary hard work that has been done. You hear all the time, I read an op-ed the other day in the Financial Times about the struggles of the economy in Northern Ireland. Sure, true. Never mentioned in that piece was that it had the lowest unemployment rate in the United Kingdom. Never mentioned in that piece was that it was the happiest region of all the regions of the United Kingdom. Not anywhere in that piece did it say that 1,200 international companies are doing business in Northern Ireland. Didn't mention any of that. It focused on structural challenges with the healthcare sector, which, by the way, we got some of those too. Okay. It mentioned calcification of divides, along sectarian divides in society. We got those too. So I don't say that to minimize them. I just say that to say, hey, you can look at the downside of everything. Or you can also recognize that you've come a pretty long way. Recognize that success and the hard work that's gone into it. And if you have done the hard part, which you have confidence that you can take on the next series of challenges, because you can.
And in relation to your specific role as Special Envoy, because you talked about Northern Ireland and its people and its leadership, but your role as Special Envoy was critical as well. So can you talk to us about what precisely your ambitions were for that role?
Sure. The role, I think, as many folks in this audience knows, was most famously held by its first occupant, and Senator George Mitchell, which on the one hand is an extraordinary luxury because it provides a North Star about how anyone should seek to conduct themselves in this position. On the other hand, if the first guy to hold the job essentially helps facilitate the Nobel Peace Prize, it's like, so what are you going to do? I'm like, not that. But it is due thanks to his work and obviously countless others around him that helped lay that foundation to where we are today, what Northern Ireland has achieved on its own. The role has been redefined by every person holding it based upon the circumstances of that moment, what is politically, economically feasible in that moment, and the strengths and opportunities that every person in it has. And it's been done on a bipartisan basis. Every president, since President Clinton, has had a special envoy to Northern Ireland, including Donald Trump. The first time in his first administration, Mick Mulvaney was there, his former chief of staff. His time, candidly, was a bit abridged. I think he would acknowledge that as well, because COVID got in the way and he couldn't travel as much as he was hoping to, which limits the effectiveness of the position. But Mary, I think, from my position, it's understanding the position that you walk into, understanding the circumstances that you're going to find yourself and where Northern Ireland is in that moment, and what you can do with it. I wasn't granted a big budget by the US government, which some could say, hey, you should have been, and I would say, maybe, yes, it would have been great to be able to come with a whole bunch of money to be able to build up programs in Northern Ireland. It's also part of the United Kingdom. It's a fairly developed country. So we should think about, well, what is it? Is that actually the right use of US taxpayer dollars to be spending directly for development for Northern Ireland? Well, I could argue yes. I could also argue that the United Kingdom is more than capable of making some of those decisions. But what can we do to try to leverage those opportunities for Northern Ireland that are perhaps unique in that moment? The fact is that Northern Ireland has done an awful lot to get itself to this place. And there's a number of sectors that I think if the Americans and others recognize the strength of those sectors, Northern Ireland would be doing an awful lot better. And so the screen industry is top of that list. I assume some folks in this crowd have seen Game of Thrones and a number of other films that were made there. The screen sector and screen industry is one of the, it's as good as you will find it anywhere in the world. And there's an opportunity for an awful lot more. There's an emerging climate sector. That is great. The services sector there really is top-notch anywhere in the world, which helps bring that, was one of the reasons why the unemployment rate is so low. The cybersecurity sector there, legit, it is the #1 destination for US firms in all of Europe for cybersecurity investment. It's Belfast, Northern Ireland. So it's trying to help them see it a bit to help Americans see it a bit in a different light. And the biggest challenge there was just getting people there.
Right.
They go to Dublin all the time. They go to London all the time. I mean, I talked to one executive who was like, I've just never had the time. I was like, it's an hour and a half. I have to drive a little fast, but an hour and 45 minutes, right? But it ain't that far away. And almost to a person, when you get them there, they say, we never knew. Last part, I'll tell you on that. We had, my wife studied at Oxford for a period of time. She still has some friends that are over in London, so they came over to visit Belfast with us when I took my family up there. None of them had ever been. And after spending a weekend there, they kind of went, how have we never been here? But it never even occurred to them to go. And now it has. And they had a lovely time, because it's a lovely place. Those of you how many of you have been to Belfast? How many of you have taken a picture in front of the banner that says it only rains on days they don't, and why? Yeah. You brought the Irish weather with you today, though, so we got it.
And what do you have any standout memories from the periods that you spent there? Because you were over and back every 6 weeks or so and met so many people.
A gajillion memories. I mean, and just like some of the most amazing memories. Some of the ones that I can share. So I've taken this group of a bunch of CEOs and asset managers, and that have a whole bunch of money that we're over there trying to get them to make some investments in Northern Ireland, and we go up to Derry. And for those of you that happen to know Derry and Londonderry and the extraordinary historical significance of the area and the old city and the old walls, and the #1 tourist destination in Derry is the Derry Girls mural, because of course it is, right? So we got off the bus and everybody runs over the 400-year-old walls to get right in front of the mural. And as we line up this group of, very impressive and significant business leaders, right on cue, around the corner comes 3 kids, probably between 10 and 12, 13, 14 years old, in matching tracksuits, and one with chocolate ice cream all over his face. And they just fold right in with the tour group, and they start ripping in to all of us as if we were long lost cousins. And got John Murphy there, who's the president of Coca-Cola, being like, who's that? The kid's throwing it right back at John Murphy. And one of them turns to me and goes, do you know who that is? And the kid, without missing a beat, goes, yeah, that's Joe from Peaky Blinders. And I was like, close, but not quite. Right? They followed us around for the rest of the day when we were in Derry. And one of them has been in touch with one of the executives from Microsoft that was there to keep, for Alteryx rather, to try to get a job. I mean, it was amazing. And as kind of funny as that story was, that we adopted 3 kids in the midst of this tour group, it stuck with me, Mary, because I think of the confidence that those kids would have had to see a tourist group from probably America, right? But fold on in and just act like it's home and be comfortable enough with whoever it was. They had no idea who we were, but they were just, going back and forth with us. And what that meant for the community that they grew up in, the community that they were trying to build, their ability to relate and to their sense of humor and their wit, and there's something special about that, right? That doesn't happen very often. But it happened there. And myriad other examples of folks that could speak so powerfully to that opportunity, powerfully about the trauma of the past, which is one of the challenges in Northern Ireland, right? The past is never far away, right? We can tell this story about what happened in front of Dare Girls mural on top of walls that were 400 years old that have seen their own series of challenges and trauma. And you can say that in plenty of parts of the region. And so trying to ask a population to work through that, and again, as we talked about a moment ago, to then turn around and get frustrated that like you haven't been able to shake it off in 25 years when you're like, this went on for a long time before. I mean, you know, Irish folks here hold grudges for at least 25 years too, right? It takes some time, but they're doing extraordinary work.
And actually, that point has resonance with the United States as well today. You know, when people go through a period of instability and uncertainty and polarization, as we're seeing now, the remnants of that live on, and they live on into the future. So tackling them from the get-go and from an early stage is something that we should probably all be attentive to.
And to not let it calcify, right? To create the spaces and the opportunities for those differences to meet, to discuss, to understand. It doesn't mean everybody's always going to love everybody, but it does mean that you can create a space where you can coexist and where your future is protected. Because in order for me to be able to grasp what's out there for my children, you should be able to do the same, and you can at least get folks to agree to that. And you can. But, you know, I think, again, Northern Ireland flashes that example as what can be done, and also the example of what happens if you don't.
Yeah, sure. And like you say, it's challenging and it's difficult, and it can be very frustrating, all of that process. So can you talk to us about how you witnessed and experienced that in Northern Ireland? Is it just about staying the course and remaining attentive and keep talking?
I mean, that's obviously a big part of it, Mary, but I think anybody that has done some of that community level work knows that the way that you have to do that, it comes from a community, and it has to be very intentional about creating that space, right? Creating the space where people can come and meet and engage, and you know, it's not going to be necessarily to start, hey, let's, you know, address issues of you know, a Catholic church and a Protestant church, right? And try to solve that. That's a big one to take on over lunch, right? But there are, in fact, ways that you can create space to address issues of the pollution of the local well or the creek, or the issues with your local school, or the challenges of some factory that's bursting out pollution and noise that's affecting your kid just as it's affecting mine. And, you know, you mentioned younger folks. My kids are still pretty young, 9 and 7. I remember their preschool years, and again, they have not seen, they've not been experienced or subjected to those sharp divides of difference that we see in other places. But a 3-year-old doesn't care what church you go to. A 3-year-old wants to play, right? No one asks, they just play. And so it's not so much that a younger generation has this obligation in order to try to change things, although one would hope that they lean into that. That's when your 3-year-old that belongs to one church and a 3-year-old that belongs to another are playing on the same playground, it forces communities to mix and engage. And that's the part that is the hope for that future, right? It's creating those opportunities at community level that are built on community level trust to create the space that brings people in. And that's slow, and that's hard, and that takes time. But it does work. And I was up at one community organization, based organization that, you know, had a my last day, actually, in Northern Ireland, that had a loyalist that was, as they say, active in the Troubles, who talked about his pathway to basically becoming a community engagement officer for folks in his community, so on the loyalist side, and he just said, I know what I grew up through, I know what I lived through, I know what I did, and I know I don't want that for my son. And I know that if I don't want that for my son, his future has to be safe and secure, and I know that for his future to be safe and secure, that other guy's future has to be safe and secure. So that's what I'm trying to do.
So it's like you say, for young people in particular, they don't have to start with the big questions. You know, they can start at the community level and leverage relationships there and work on initiatives right there.
I don't think you can ever start at the big questions, right? You grow to the big questions. But the big questions, look, the big questions are going to require anywhere, across any society, in the United States clearly as well, big questions require big compromises. And, you know, some of those questions, they're not necessarily solvable. Like, that's what a democracy is for. You can work your way through them. There's not an end. Democracy is never, as we've seen, is never wholly protected. It's earned and nurtured and cultivated and passed on to a next generation that has to earn and cultivate and nurture it and pass it on again. These questions are not necessarily to resolve. These questions are to figure out how we can coexist and flourish and have our futures protected and celebrated and enable progress and fulfillment and the creation of community and home and safety. And younger people, by definition, where you're not exposed to that level of, again, I've had the fortune of traveling to many countries around the world. I have never been to a place where if you find a kid and throw him a ball, they don't pick it up and throw it back. They just don't. Kids are kids. But that means that division and that fear and that hate is learned. It's not something they're born with. And so if you have that opportunity, particularly for younger folks, you know, for us to be able to create that space, to create that churn and that opportunity for that kinetic energy just to bang together, good things will come out of it. You can't measure that in an election cycle. That doesn't happen 2 years. You know, there's not a huge change that happens in 2 years, but there is a change that happens in 10 years and in 20 years. And that is what you've seen in Northern Ireland. 20 years ago, it didn't have the lowest unemployment rate in the UK. And I say this with appreciation, right? The Europa Hotel is still the most bombed hotel in the world. It hasn't been bombed more, right? The bomb hasn't gone off there in a long time. And that's a big tribute to the people of Northern Ireland.
And your brief as Special Envoy was, there was an emphasis on the economy and trade, and that was the focus of the work that you did. In the post-conflict setting like Northern Ireland, where you still have an element of polarization and damaged community relationships, do you think that was the best vehicle for a Special Envoy? And I'm thinking of it in terms of the possibility that President Trump might appoint a new Special Envoy. Is that something that you would see as being useful again?
I think, look, Northern Ireland is still a complicated place for all of my kind of focus on the opportunities in front of it. It's a complicated place. One of the areas of largest agreement, most consensus, is that an economy structured to benefit everybody can do a better job of raising, you know, rising tide can try to lift all boats, right? So it was the focus that President Biden asked me to focus on, candidly, in part because it was going to be the least controversial thing to do, right? Diving on into some of the other structural aspects that are coming from a foreign nation, however deeply our relationships are, however deep they are with Ireland and the United Kingdom from far away, to try to address that those are issues for Ireland, Northern Ireland, United Kingdom to resolve, right? We can help, but they have to resolve them. A special envoy is not going to wholly be able to do that. And so the opportunity, however, to to make the case that if you want to secure your future, your neighbor has to be able to secure theirs, and if you are able to do that, there's an opportunity here that is in front of you that is big and bright. I think does, like 100%, it helps. It's not, it's not necessarily going to solve every problem, but I do believe that over time it has a major impact, because as people stop looking at Northern Ireland as a post-conflict society and start looking at Northern Ireland as, wow, this was a great place to come visit. Wow, the sun also shines in places in Northern Ireland, not just the Republic, and it shines in places that aren't just tea boxes. And there's wonderful places to visit. There's great places to go out, to go hiking and exploring and food and all of the rest of this. And all of that is true. And all of that slowly but surely does point to a much brighter future. I'll finish with one story that I think demonstrates this. Some of you will know this. On one of my visits about a year ago, I was on my way back home, and we were visiting a group of American investors had brought some money in to refurbish the McConnell's brand of whiskey, which was founded, nice enough, in 1776. It was an old Irish whiskey brand, Northern Irish whiskey brand, that these investors had come in with some public dollars, and they renovated this facility, which some of you will know because it was the old Crumlin Road Jail, which has a particular history in the history of Northern Ireland. So we go over there, and they've done this beautiful job, Mary, like refurbishing the whole thing, and it's gorgeous. And we walk in, and we're waiting for a bunch of cameras and such, and we're waiting for the First Minister and Deputy First Minister, and I'm sitting there with Conor Murphy and some other ministers there, and we're chatting, and I turned to Mr. Murphy and I said, "This place is gorgeous. Have you been here before?" My diplomatic career ended. He smirked and he said, "Yeah, I have. That one was mine." If there was a hole to crawl into, I would have crawled into it. And he said he spent 6 months in that cell block. And then there was a riot, and they moved everybody to Long Cash. And then he shrugged his shoulders and said, "Times change." And a couple minutes later, it was 11 o'clock in the morning, and a Catholic First Minister and a Protestant Deputy First Minister and a guy who was in cell block A and an Irish guy Catholic guy who now lives in the United States were sipping Irish whiskey, toasting to a different future for Northern Ireland. And like, times change, but times change because they changed them. But they did it. And they got a lot of work to do, but it's come a long way.
Well, I think that's a very positive message on which to perhaps move to the audience for some questions and answers. Thank you very much indeed, Congressman, for that conversation. I think we have about 10 minutes or so for questions from the audience. So we've got 2 microphones. Anyone like to start us off? Hi there.
Hi, Jim Foley, Charitable Irish Network. What is the role of immigrants to Northern Ireland? So we had, there's a Catholic population, Protestant population, but there's another group coming in, Poles, other people. How are they impacting the politics, the society, et cetera?
Oh, it's a great question. I think a couple of things. One, immigration everywhere is a hot topic, right? And it's a hot topic, as you know, on the island of Ireland. There's a hot topic in the Republic of Ireland last summer. It's a hot topic in the UK, certainly under a Tory government. It's complex, and it's still complex in Northern Ireland. All of that being said, you've got a government there that is, given some of the financial dynamics vis-a-vis Westminster and London, that knows that in order to address some of the structural barriers there, they need foreign investment. And because of an odd quirk that you might be aware of in Northern Ireland, their university slots are capped, so they end up sending a lot of their university students away, either to mainland UK or the Republic, and then they don't get, not all of them come back, which is a terrible way to try to build the endemic skills in your economy. You're exporting some of your brightest folks. But so there are plenty of companies there that are trying to roll out that welcome mat for immigrants to come back, high-skilled immigrants to come back and take some of those positions, because that is a big part of how that economy will grow. Again, that doesn't come without complexity, right? And there's tension amidst all of that. But at least from my perspective there, one of the questions that is percolating in Northern Ireland, as I'm sure you're aware, is, in particular amongst a younger population, is there really only two paths about an Irish identity, right? A Northern Irish identity. Is it, do you have to be loyalists or kind of Republican? Or can you just be Northern Irish, right? Like, I mean, the Alliance Party kind of occupies a bit of that space of saying, you know, some of these questions we don't necessarily have to solve, right? We can actually build a thriving community here with who we are and a Northern Irish identity that is separate and apart from your kind of long-term desire to maintain an allegiance with the crown or to unify an island. Like, we can just be here and build this. And I think it will be interesting to see how that evolves with the younger generation and an immigrant population.
Thank you. Anyone else? No? Oh, we have one here. Catherine Shannon.
Thank you, Joe. That was a very, very interesting discussion, and congratulations on all your hard work in Northern Ireland. I was particularly pleased that you mentioned the importance of building relationships at the community level as a way to bring trust and gradually have that percolate upwards. And for people studying the peace process in recent years, they're beginning to recognize the important role that women at the community level played in creating mutual respect and trust. However, post-Good Friday Agreement, I'm not sure that the women have been recognized and have had their needs addressed in the way that the Good Friday Agreement promised. And I think one area that is important is probably the question of how much inward investment can go to help women get more education, start businesses, and that kind of thing. And if there's any way that rules about inward investment can be sensitive to those gendered issues.
Thanks for being here. It's a great question and a complicated one. And you know, there's the legal frameworks and what's permitted or allowed or prohibited, and then there's the cultural aspect of this, which some of these challenges with regards to women's role in society is, in Northern Ireland, it's more cultural and normative. Obviously there's not laws in the book saying you can or can't. It's just, particularly when some of those more traditional gender roles are more calcified in Northern Ireland than in other places. And that is to the detriment of some of the female leadership in Northern Ireland. A couple examples. One example, obviously, to say tremendous progress has been made is you got a deputy minister, a first minister, deputy first minister that are both women. You've had a number in the past, since my time there, a number of the leaders of those parties were also women as well. So in a political sphere, you've actually seen women be able to rise to the highest echelons of the political process. Corporate process is certainly harder, and it has been harder. One of the things that I tried to push Mary when I was there was trying to encourage the political process to do more on childcare. Because childcare was a place, as I mentioned before, 3-year-olds don't ask what church you belong to, they just play. But from somebody whose kids are out at the playground still, you bump into other people and you start conversations because your kids start playing together. And it's actually a way to create a community to mix. This is numbers probably about 18 months old or so, but as I was kind of leaning into some of the challenges around in the economics and kind of the calcification of some of those roles about how would we go about doing that? How would you finance it and what could we do about it? the civil service from Northern Ireland told me that there was a need for, I think it was 2,000 people with a college degree. There were openings in the economy today to fill those today. 2,000 jobs for people with a college degree. There were 9,000 women with a college degree who were not working. And essentially, it was caring for dependents, kids and parents. And the calcification of those gender roles that still said that despite perhaps the academic attainment and the professional attainment, those roles were going to be, women, for whatever reason, were not able to fully come back into the workforce or re-enter the workforce or whatever else, right? And if you could address some of those issues, you could unlock an enormous amount of potential for that workforce that was already trained, right? So yes, we've got a training issue in Northern Ireland that, you know, from apprenticeships and, you know, non-college degrees to higher level learnings, et cetera. But you also have 9,000 people that have a college degree that for whatever reason are not gaining access back into the workforce. And that's something that can be done culturally as well. Hard, but if you can do it in politics, you should be able to do that in the corporate sector. And for whatever reason, there's been challenges with that.
I think we can take one more question before we finish up. Just here. Thank you.
Over my lifetime, we've seen progress on a political level, on economic level, on a sporting level even. But one area we haven't seen much progress is on secondary education, where the schools are still segregated. So what did you see when you were there?
It's a great question, and I probably share your perspective of the single biggest thing that Northern Ireland could do is integrated education. And that's hard for a variety of reasons. Mary can get into this in probably even more depth than I can. You know, for those of you that are familiar with the structure there, I think the percentage of children that meet the, and it is a legal term of art, right, but meet the definition of being in an integrated school, right, which is different than we interpret it here in the United States, but in an integrated school is still 7%, right, 7. So the mixing is better than that, I think, as you know, but even if you say, okay, fine, triple that, you're at 20%. And that's where my perspective on this is trying to address those differences after a child has gone to school for 8, 10, 12 years and then come back in afterwards and address the calcification of some of that mindset that just gets passed in culturally from being absorbed in a segregated setting is an awful lot harder to do than making sure that 3-year-old that is in a child care system that is mixed and that feeds into a school that is mixed, you just never let that calcification happen. And there was actually studies done, UN did a study about the long-term impact of integrated child care in a post-conflict society, and it was one of the best reforms you can make. Because you got those kids moving around and that forced the parents to engage as well. So without question, I don't know of a society in the world, there might be one, that can point to continued separate educations as being beneficial, right? You want to address these long-term needs, we need to address, Northern Ireland needs to find ways to address that one. It will have a lot of help as it chooses to, and it's a hard one, but it is, if you want to get to where I think folks want to go, that has to change.
Thanks very much. And as you say, there are still many issues to navigate, but they can all be met ultimately. So I'm sure that you mentioned the fact that one of your frustrations was around people not travelling to Northern Ireland in sufficient numbers, but I'm sure some will have been enthused by your contribution here this evening. And I know there's a big golf tournament coming up there during the summer, which will probably attract a few interested parties. Can I thank you, Congressman, for being with us this evening? And And can I also thank you, particularly in these surroundings, the Edward M. Kennedy Institute, which is focused on public service and leadership. Thank you for your public service on the island of Ireland, but specifically in Northern Ireland. I think it's been to the benefit of all communities back home, and that's a wonderful testament to your work and to your effort, and I also think to your commitment to that place on the other side of the Atlantic. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mary, and great, thank you all for coming. As I said to her before, if somebody said, hey, in the next 2 years you get to go to Ireland 10 times, would you really say no? Probably not. Thank you.
Carla Hannan, who has travelled from Northern Ireland to be with us today. Carla is the Vice Chair of and Governance Lead of the Northern Ireland Youth Forum. It's a regional youth organisation that promotes youth voices and supports young people across a range of issues. Carla was telling me that this is her second trip to the US in as many weeks. Her first trip was to Washington, or to New York, I think, a couple of weeks ago. So Carla, thank you for making the return journey within a week. Carla is a social policy graduate and a member of the 2025 Northern Ireland Emerging Leaders Programme. And finally, but not least, we welcome local Leena Ghrici, I hope I'm pronouncing that rightly, who is Mayor Wu's Youth Council Programme Coordinator for the Office of Youth Engagement and Advancement here in Boston. Leena supports the many Mayor's Youth Council meetings. She spearheads engagement initiatives that really foster meaningful change and build meaningful partnerships across the city of Boston. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Fiona for what I know is going to be a very interesting conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks ever so much for the lovely welcome. Good evening, everyone. I'm delighted to moderate this conversation about youth leadership and peace building across our connected communities. As Consul General mentioned, we're really fortunate to have two remarkable leaders with us today, Leena and Carla, as we consider, I suppose, the evolving Irish diaspora and lessons learned from the peace process. We're going to chat about and explore how your insights can guide today's youth through political polarization and community building challenges. Our conversation over the next 30 minutes will look at women's leadership, navigating diverse identities, and also chat about creating pathways for the next generation of change makers. So we can begin, I think, at this point by learning a little bit more about how identity shapes your approach to your work. Both of you come from fascinating backgrounds that have shaped your perspectives. You let me in on that when we had a chat last week, and it was one thing that came up that really stuck with me. Leena, as the daughter of Burmese and Algerian immigrants, and Carla, your parents from different religious traditions in Northern Ireland, how has your personal identity influenced your approach to community work? Leena, would you like to go first?
I just want to say I feel very honored to be sitting here speaking to people today, sharing space with my wonderful co-panelist Carla, and yeah, I'll just get right into it. I would say growing up mixed race with immigrant parents in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, all across the planet on the other side of the world, there's a 12-hour time difference and the climate's very different. I've always felt that my identity was never something that I could compartmentalize. It was more of a lens through which I was able to see the world through. That being said, growing up in Malaysia, very, very different to being here and being around people like the mayor and just being able to be around opportunities such as this. I would say I feel very fortunate that my upbringing has instilled in me a deep understanding of how, I'd say, systemic inequities can shape access to opportunity, whether they're rooted in geography, religion, gender, ethnicity, and the like. I wanted to start off by saying that before, I think it was prior to the pandemic that changed the world as we know it today, I spent some time volunteering and living at an orphanage for Rohingya children in Myanmar. This was a place of refuge for children that had been affected by ethnic cleansing and political violence. It was a very transformative experience for me because growing up, you hear about the violence that goes on over there. Myanmar was only a 2-hour plane ride away from Malaysia, so it's pretty close to home, and my mother's Burmese. But it never really hit home just how real it was until I was there on the ground with them. I was there to teach them math and English, but really, and more importantly, I realized I was there to bear witness to the very real human cost of political violence and displacement. I realized that I witnessed firsthand how public policy, or the lack thereof really, in the most extreme cases can be pretty much just like the line that divides life and death for people. And I would say that experience continues to shape the work that I do, and it really drives my approach in the civic work that I do, in the sense that it pushes me forward to use my voice to represent those at the very margins of society.
Thank you. Carla?
Yes, so thank you, Fiona, and thank you, Leena, for your contribution. It is absolutely amazing to be here. Yeah, as I was briefly mentioned, this is my second trip to the US in the space of 2 weeks, so it is just amazing to be here. But yes, so touching on your question, I have also been very fortunate that I have grew up outside of Belfast. I grew up in the countryside in Northern Ireland, in County Down. A beautiful part of the east of the country. It is amazing. My parents, my father being from a traditional Catholic Republican background, and my mother being from a very loyalist Protestant background, they made the decision that when they decided to have kids, not to put religion on us. That would just make things a lot more complicated than it needed to be. So they let it go, and then they decided that if it was when the time was right, when I got older, if I decided to go down the religious route, that I could choose myself what side to be on. And I guess that's kind of led me to where I am today, and a lot of my identity has been questioned by myself. I have really struggled on who I am and where I belong and what side of the fence I belong on. A lot of the conversations and debate in Northern Ireland is, are you green, are you orange? And I always tick that other box, which is it can be very confusing growing up, trying to figure out what side you belong on, but it also has made me so open-minded. I come from such a political family who are so politically involved. My grandfather has been a trade unionist his whole life and has really always taught me to question things and challenge things where I feel like there's injustices or no equity. And I feel like that with issues in Northern Ireland recently along the lines of integrated education and health and mental health specifically in young people, as well as criminal responsibility. There is climate. There's so many issues that young people nowadays are so much more focused on rather than the issue of identity. And what actually makes us more alike than different is what truly brings us together. And being involved in youth advocacy and youth activism and meeting people from all corners of Northern Ireland that I normally wouldn't have been able to meet. I know that there's some people I've met that, you know, they have went to an all-girls Catholic school their whole lives, and they've lived in a little Catholic village that is very nationalist, and they haven't had those experiences of leaving their village and going and meeting other people from all walks of life. One of my friends didn't meet a Protestant until she was 16, so that was a big shock for her, I guess. But yeah, it's very different. Northern Ireland and the young people growing up there now, they're starting to lean more towards being politically involved and engaged. And I guess for me, that has something that has really inspired me, and seeing the differences between both sides, but also seeing the similarities is what drives us together.
Thanks ever so much for being so candid. It's a testament to the work that both of you have done already. Staying on identity a little bit more, but on an issue that was brought up in one of the questions on the support of women in leadership positions. How do you both see women's leadership styles contributing to peace building and conflict resolution in your respective communities? Carla, do you want to start with this?
Yeah, of course. That's a really good question. As Joe mentioned earlier, Northern Ireland currently has two very strong women in leadership, the first and deputy first minister. As well as that, there is numerous parties. I think it is now 3 parties on the executive that are led by women. So the political engagement from women is on the increase. I think we're sitting at probably about 40% representation from what I can remember. But yeah, like women's leadership goes right back to the peace process. It goes back to, the very, very beginning, and it's not just the Good Friday Agreement, it's way before then. Monica McWilliams is someone that really comes to mind when I think of her and women's leadership. She was the co-founder of the National Women's Council, who had a significant role in the peace process, not just from the political point of view, but from a grassroots level. They were out getting women involved when men were away or during the Troubles, and they really played a vital role in bringing women to the table and making space for women in those arenas. They also, women bring such a unique lens to peace building. They bring in a sense of empathy, sympathy. They bring in issues that wouldn't normally be brought to the table, such as childcare, health, and that those gender, stereotypical gender roles that they kind of always focus it on. So I think there's so many lessons to learn from the styles of leadership, but also that, I know it was touched on earlier, that, it's always talked about how it's nationalists and unionists, or it's Protestants and Catholics, but there's also such a big migrant community now growing in Northern Ireland, and I feel like I've met and I've worked with some of the most amazing migrant women who are going out and they're reaching out to other migrant women in their communities, and they're helping them, their children fill in forms for starting school. They're getting them access to food banks and food vouchers, and it's these women in local communities who are like the unsung heroes, and they're not on the front page of the media, they're not on the news, they're in the communities working for the people that are their neighbours. And I just think that is so special, and to meet these people and to highlight the work that they do is just such a gift.
Thank you. Leena, can you relate to some of...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that over here in the city of Boston, I think there's been a real shift in leadership, particularly women's leadership. As many of you are familiar with, we are currently under the Wu administration as of right now. Mayor Michelle Wu of the city of Boston is the first woman of color elected to be mayor of Boston, and under her leadership, Chief of Staff Tiffany Chu, City Council President Ruth C. Lujan, just so many inspirational leaders, female leaders in the city that I feel very honored to work under, especially with their guidance. I think that in the sense of women's leadership, particularly with the city of Boston, I feel that their style of leadership focuses a lot more on participatory governance, a lot more on accountability and transparency in City Hall, really breaking down the barriers between City Hall and the rest of Boston, making sure that our constituents feel that it's not as daunting to go inside. Although City Hall is a very big and brutalist structure, we want to make sure through their leadership that it's really not a daunting task to go in there and ask to be seen, to voice your concerns, and to just make sure that your voice is heard amongst the greater population of Boston. I think that in that vein, I don't believe that what they're doing is like inclusive governance under them doesn't really feel performative, in the sense that they are working to include at the very start of public policy making marginalized voices. So I believe that when you include voices from historically marginalized communities, women and particularly communities of color, I think that you effectively eliminate blind spots from the very beginning of the public policy process, which I think in turn really does shape out and kind of fine-tune public policy in the sense that it eliminates little barriers and little ridges that would have otherwise have been there, and therefore just really come out with policy that's way smoother, much more long-lasting, and as a whole more effective.
What you have just, both of you really just mentioned, it really touches on what Congressman Kennedy and Professor Murphy mentioned about, well, it was Congressman Kennedy who said creating the opportunity to create intentional space to have that community building process. And if we think about navigating diverse communities, for instance, in that regard, you both work in communities with historical divisions. What strategies have you found most effective in building bridges as such across different identity groups? And Leena, I'll start with you on this one.
Sure, no worries. So I'd say the city of Boston really is a city of neighborhoods, each with its own unique demographics, history, and tensions. In my role as a municipal staffer running and facilitating the Mayor's Youth Council, I work with youth from all over the city, different neighborhoods. For example, Dorchester, Mattapan, East Boston, and Roxbury. Historically, communities that have been disinvested in, yet have remained incredibly resilient in the face of it all. I would say that a strategy that my team members and I have found to be pretty effective in our work that we do in facilitating the council is really to decenter ourselves. We take a step back, and instead of prescribing what youth engagement should look like, we ask, what does your community need? What does leadership look like to you? How do you want to lead? And we found that in doing so and implementing these processes, it's really done so much good towards our council. And I also think, in the same vein of peace building and bridging generational divides, I think, at least within the city of Boston, peace building doesn't always look like long formal negotiations or peace treaties. Sometimes I think it looks like creating youth spaces where everyone feels like it's safe to be heard and to speak their opinion. I think it means creating third spaces where differences aren't just tolerated but valued. And I think that's the kind of peace building that we want to see implemented and emphasized in our city.
Carla?
Yes, it's exactly what Leena just said. It's all about dialogue. I think that one of the main things, especially in Northern Ireland, and it's been entrenched, is that you just say nothing, whereas the new generation is coming up and they are saying something. They're getting together, and a strategy I just think is so powerful is just healthy dialogue and debate. often we think that peace building is everyone has to agree with each other, and I just think it's not democratic. I think we need to have healthy debate, and disagreement is healthy because it holds people to account. And coming from a country that has such political instability, we don't know if it's going to be, the government's going to be up in 1 minute or it's going to be down. That healthy debate, especially amongst young people, and creating that space is so, so important. And as well as that, I think another strategy is to not fear youth-led initiatives. One of the most proudest things about the organisation that I'm a part of, the Northern Ireland Youth Forum, is that we are entirely youth-led and adult-supported. It means that the opinions, the ideas, the campaigns, everything comes from the young people, from the ground up, and is completely supported by adults. And that can be quite scary, I think, sometimes to the older generation. They may think that bringing a young person to a government building or to a board meeting to present is like, oh, they're going to get overwhelmed, or they're not going to understand the terminology. But actually, that's not the case. And I have met so many young people that have more confidence, more potential than a lot of the adults in the room, more knowledge, and it is truly inspiring as well. So I think that there they are, the main strategies is just healthy dialogue and debate.
And to that point, on that healthy dialogue that both of you have been having in your respective roles, tell me a little bit about specifics as far as empowering the next generation as such. Leena, could you share a specific example of how the Mayor's Youth Council has influenced policy in Boston? And in turn, Carla, how has your work in housing and homelessness in particular has ensured that young voices are actually heard rather than tokenized?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I'm very excited to talk about this because I'd love to wax lyrical about all our amazing initiatives that our youth counselors do. But in my opinion, I think one of the most impactful initiatives that we've run, that they've spearheaded and are currently still in the process of leading, is our, it's called our Safe Streets Committee. It essentially just boils down into increasing pedestrian safety and increasing compliance to ADA regulations around the city of Boston. So what we're working on is adding ramps and more crosswalks to very traffic-heavy areas of the city of Boston, specifically South Boston, for example, that we're looking at right now. And you might think, it's kind of an easy ask, adding a crosswalk. How expensive is a can of white paint? All you gotta do is paint a few blocks. Well, really, it's not. What seems like a small infrastructure ask actually boils down to very extensive data collection, community outreach, and very, very in-depth interdepartmental collaboration. We've worked with the city's engineers, the city's Department of Streets, public planning, and public works. So it's a real big family project, as I like to call it. But yeah, I think that getting that project passed and being able to see them work on it and just show them just how much of a tangible impact and a tangible change that they can have on their neighborhoods really is so fulfilling. And I think not only that we increase walkability to the city, we gave our counselors a sense of real empowerment and fulfillment to the work that they do. Not only that they added a new crosswalk and are currently in the process of installing a ramp, they've seen that they are capable of bringing real change to the neighborhoods that they represent. And I think amongst other initiatives, that's one that I'm particularly proud of. So I just wanted to add to that and say that the work that we do with our youth council, I think with all youth work really, is without the right directions and without the right influences, it can feel very performative. But with our work at the Youth Council, I think with the right scaffolding, we're really paving the way for them to show that they can affect municipal decision-making. Yeah.
So for me, to give a bit of context around the housing and homelessness work that I'm engaged in, so the Northern Ireland Youth Forum, the organisation's kind of split into two. So the first half deals with the more strategic side of things, which is youth voice and advocacy. And then the other side is housing and homelessness, and specifically youth housing and homelessness. So we have what we call our Youth Manifesto for Change, and it was a report basically designed by young people. It was 6 years of youth-led research, and in it had a list of key asks that were actually linked to the UNCRC, and a lot of them, one of them was housing and homelessness, and then there was one specifically, and it was to develop and create what we call an all-party group on youth participation, which we achieved. And I'm grateful that our organisation is the secretariat for that. So over the past year, the main theme of that all-party group on youth participation that is located at Stormont, we have had, I think in total we had about 8 meetings where we were able to invite key grassroots and NGOs that are working with housing and homelessness issues specifically targeted towards youth and young people. And they were able to come in, present their research, bring young people with lived experience, which is so important to us, because lived experience, they're the experts. They're living it every day. They know the system. They deal with the system every day. And I think one of the things that struck me was that in one of these meetings, we had a young person directly who was homeless, living in a hostel, stand up in front of a room of politicians and tell their story, and it was just so powerful. And I definitely think that that has been one of the main things that has really inspired me to dive into more of the housing and homelessness work, because I was one of those people that was so naive and very, very privileged growing up that I was blind that this was going on. We currently have in Northern Ireland 18,000 young people who are homeless or on the verge of being homeless. We have 1 in 4 children who are living in poverty. We are one of the only countries in the United Kingdom without an anti-poverty strategy. The list just goes on. Services are struggling, they're crumbling. So to have this arena where we can advocate, bring young people to also advocate for themselves and their friends who they meet along the way is just so important. And one of the proudest achievements, we recently finished the report that got launched on youth housing and homelessness that was supplied to all 90 MLAs and all parties, and with a list of 18 recommendations, which is a lot, but we know it's achievable with hard work and really cross-party engagement.
Well done. That's I read the report and it was really impressive, and recommend that you all do the same if you have the opportunity. In thinking ahead, what lessons have you learned from, I suppose, your respective communities and in the histories of your respective communities, rather, and what do you see as most valuable for young people navigating a polarized world as it is today? Carla?
I think a major lesson that I've learned is that to be open-minded. As I said earlier, Northern Ireland is becoming a melting pot of culture. It is becoming such a space for young people to grow and develop and meet other people from a wide range of communities. One of the major things for young people as well is the importance of their education. There was talk earlier on the previous panel around integrated education, and it's something that myself am very passionate about. I went to a state school that was crumbling to pieces. I also went to a very affluent grammar school that had so many potential opportunities, and the inequalities that I saw, the educational inequalities was stark. One of the main things that we can learn to fix that issue is the role of academic selection in Northern Ireland and the role of integrated education, and how those two things combined can eliminate education inequality, which is so, so important. Another lesson I've learned would be that, again, is to not judge other people for choosing an identity. I find that I tick that box as other, but people are very culturally, like they hold on to their history and their culture. And even though I grew up in a house that didn't practice religion, and my mother very much has her British passport and my father very much has his Irish passport, and I'm very lucky that I have both. But I went to a Protestant state school for most of my education, and I never told anyone that my father was Catholic and identified as Irish. And that's probably a massive regret, because that's a part of me and it's a part of my history and my identity. But I was scared of what other people thought, and I hid it. And now that I'm older, I'm kind of like, oh, I shouldn't have hid that. I should have been proud of it. And I just think young people just don't care in Northern Ireland anymore. It's just simple as that. It's not green, it's not orange, it's just who you are, and you should be proud of it.
That in itself is a really interesting shift. So thank you for speaking on your lived experience of it as such, which is, to your point, really important. Leena?
I think that one of the most enduring lessons that I've learned to take home from both my heritage and the work that I've been doing is really that young people are not immune to conflict, and it's frankly quite silly to assume the otherwise. Whether it's systemic inequalities, poverty, displacement, war, political violence, or really just even inequality and differences and disparages in the schools. Like, I really like that you brought up the school system and how it's different, and even though it's not as dramatic here, you do see a big disparity in how certain schools in the Boston Public School District are funded. So you'll have like Boston Land School and Boston Land Academy, and they have such nice facilities and it's all decked out. And you'll go over a few districts over to Charlestown High School and it's kind of bare bones, it's a little threadbare. Yeah, went off on a bit of a tangent, but yeah, and this, back to what I was saying, in that same vein, young people are not immune to conflict, and I think that in the work and they are more often than not really just like at the forefront of the consequences of that conflict. And they often go, I think, unrecognized as participants in its resolution in the events that they act as participants in its resolution. I think that the work that I've been doing with the Mayor's Youth Council and what my team has been trying to achieve is really to change that. We try to correct that one step at a time, starting off here in our city. I think that really looks like through, in our very own way, starting with the idea that young people have to wait to inherit the future. We disagree with that. We don't think you need to wait to inherit the future. We think they have the tools to shape it now. And through our work, I think that youth involvement in civic education and municipal city government, we equip them with the levers of influence that they need to influence city municipal decision making in the smallest ways that they can, starting off at the very small levels of deciding what colors a community center will be painted in, starting off there before we go on further to implementing crosswalks, addressing focus groups across the city to address youth substance abuse, for example. Things that exist in pockets across the city, things that may seem invisible to you but are very real issues that youth all across Boston face. And I think it's a small step, but it's one in a series of it's one in a series of, I would say, a marathon that we have to engage in to make the world a better place for our youth.
This has been such a rich conversation. Thank you both. I think it's probably a collective sigh of relief in Boston and Northern Ireland that you both represent the future of both regions, and it's really fantastic that you've been, as I said again, so candid in sharing your thoughts and experiences. We do have about 10 minutes now to open it to the floor, questions for our panelists about work, challenges, lessons they've learned along the way. So please go ahead. Yes, right there.
You mentioned integration. To those of us who aren't familiar, what type of segregation do you have? Is it black-white? Is it rich-poor? Is it male-female? And where does it exist? Is it like all the public schools, or are you just saying, is it private schools? I'm not quite clear on what type you're referring to.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So currently in Northern Ireland, schools are segregated based on religion. So I think it's currently 93% of young people still attend segregated schools. So that's only 7%. So there's loads of different types of schools in Northern Ireland. Briefly run through them. So there you've got Protestant state schools, and they can be separated by co-ed, so boys, girls. Then you've got Catholic maintained schools. They're also separated, boys, girls. You've got Catholic grammar schools. You've got Protestant grammar schools. You've got integrated schools. You've got comprehensive colleges. You have Irish medium schools, Irish maintained schools. So, and the list goes on. There's a lot more types. So there's way too many schools. Integrated education fixes that problem. It brings everyone together, whether that's, basically, the Department for Education tried a strategy a few years ago that I participated in when I was in school called shared education. And that was basically that my school, which was a Protestant state school, the integrated school 10 miles away from me, and the Catholic school that was 5 miles away from me would basically participate in shared education programs. We would all go on like field trips together, learn about each other's identity and culture, and we'd done a trip to one of the closest towns and went round all the different churches to learn about each other's religion. But that phased out very quickly. That's a temporary solution to an ongoing problem, and I believe that integrated education brings, like, it eliminates that segregation. It brings together everyone. Like Joe Kennedy said earlier, 5-year-olds don't ask about religion. They just want to play. They want a friend. They don't ask. And I just think if you were sitting beside someone that was Catholic, Protestant, and also Muslim, like we have a massive rise in migration, asylum seekers, refugee children who are now coming, attending, enrolling into the school system. It's not just about Catholic and Protestants anymore. We need to make room for these other people, and they're a part of our society now. We need to make room for them. So, yeah, that's what integrated education is.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, right over here. Thank you.
What would you say that your biggest challenge has been in, like, with the whole women's leadership, like trying to promote that and kind of do that per se? Like, what would you say, have you faced like any blowback? Have you been sort of like challenged in one specific area per se? So like, how has that kind of been?
Is that to both Leena and Carla? Thank you. Okay, so challenges.
I think, at least in my case with working under female leadership in the city, is really just dealing with a lot of like preconceived notions from the public and just addressing a lot of very deeply embedded, deep-seated misogyny when it comes to women's leadership. There's always an assumption that women can't lead because we're too emotional, we're not strong enough for this kind of work, we aren't built for the type of work that we do. We're eventually going to get married and become mothers, leave the workforce. But as our mayor has very clearly demonstrated, she brings her baby with her everywhere. She's really, there are lactation pods all over City Hall and our Boston community centers for working women, and just very, very, I think, transformational in shaping the environment that women have in the workplace today. And I would probably say that preconceived notions as a short answer. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, my answer is nearly identical. It's one of the main problems, especially it's a global issue. It's not just specific to Northern Ireland, but on the rise of the online misogyny and attacks against women, especially if you're involved in the political arena. I have seen numerous female politicians have to go into hiding, come off social media altogether, seek police advice based on, feeling unsafe by threats that they're getting online. And I have also came off social media. I had a few months ago, I had trolls, as you would call them, on X. So I had to come off X altogether. I just felt it's just not worth it. I don't use it. I'll use other forms of social media. But I have been very lucky that I've been involved in such an organisation that has two absolutely amazing assistant directors, one of them being with me today, and the female leaders that are around me and who I've met are amazing women. We also have the similar, we have political leaders in Northern Ireland, female, who have brought their babies into committee meetings and have made it very clear that they're here to, stay, whether the gender norms and the gender stereotypes of those roles, that they are here to stay in politics, and just because they are a mother and a caretaker, they're not going to care less about their job. They're there to do a job. So I feel like that is such a strong example to come up and see that as a young woman.
Thank you for the question. Anybody else? We have time for one more question. Oh, one more.
Hi, first I just want to thank you both for being here today and so poignantly and honestly sharing your experiences and the incredible efforts you are both doing to cultivate youth activism in your respective communities. So my name is Ryan O'Malley and I'm here with a couple of students from Boston College High School, only a few minutes away on Morrissey Boulevard. And one thing that our school really strives to do is to empower students to engage in intercultural and international dialogue. However, as both of you have discussed, and as we've all kind of discussed throughout both of these panels, this can feel increasingly intimidating, especially in a polarized world where said dialogue and said conversations may be resisted or frowned upon. So my question would be, beyond simply creating and establishing these opportunities for youth activism, how would you both strive to incentivize youth to resist these illusory feelings of hopelessness or predispositions that their efforts may only be ridiculed?
Thank you. You should be up here, Ryan.
That is such a good question, and I think that the only thing I can say is that imposter syndrome runs deep through so many young people, myself included. I am just a young girl from the countryside in Northern Ireland, and I'm sitting here in front of you telling you about my experiences and my work. And one of the biggest pieces of advice that I can give is that go with it, do it, deal with the stress later, deal with the consequences later, do it, and just put the fear aside. A lot of what stops you is overthinking. When I got this opportunity, I just didn't think twice about it. I took it, I said yes, and then later down the line, I was like, okay, I think I need to start preparing for this now. But yes, take every opportunity that comes to you. Don't say no to anything, because doors will only open when you say yes and take those opportunities. And engaging with people and meeting people is one of the best things that I do. I meet people every day, and the amount of people I've met who I've been able to teach them things and they've been able to teach me things. It's how you develop and you grow, and that's the biggest piece of advice I could give.
I totally agree with that, Carla. And I think what I would add to that is really that there is so much acceptance and there's a lot of safety in building community. And when you speak out, and then you are very vocal about and very vocal and vulnerable about the fears that you're feeling regarding speaking out, being intentional with what you're saying and putting yourself out there. Not only are you contributing to the space, but you're also helping cultivate it for others who possibly feel the same as you do and are just as afraid to say something for fear of being ridiculed or being made fun of and laughed and mocked at. I would add to what Carla said by just further reaffirming that your biggest doubter is really just like, it's all in your head, it's yourself. And once you get over that initial barrier, there's really nothing to lose.
Thank you again for the question. I think it's a brilliant one to end on. What incredible insights you've both shared with us today. And Leena and Carla, thank you so much. You've really shown us how youth leadership can transform communities from Boston to Belfast. Thank you all for your participation, and I'll now turn things over to Adam Hines, who will close us out with some remarks. Thank you.
Really, I'm just here to say thank you. Thank you for this powerful presentation and conversation and the insights that you provided, and Professor Murphy and Congressman Kennedy as well. Thank you to the Consulate General of Ireland, the Government of Ireland, for your continued support. I hope you all enjoyed the conversation as much as I did, and I hope you'll join us for an opportunity to continue discussing for a small reception out in the lobby. So thank you again, everyone, for coming.